I guess the first question I want to ask you is, with all the innovation, what do you see on the horizon as the next big thing for lacrosse at the high school and college level?
Wow. I mean, that's such a broad question. There's so many different, next things that could happen. Obviously, the parity is amazing. There are just so many good players, and there's so many coaches working hard at it. And watching, teams compete for national championships at the Division I level, watching more and more teams at the high school level compete for state championships, watching recruits come from all over the place, watching the level of play. It's just incredible to watch the amount of athleticism, the amount of skill, and just how much more. And it's like every few years, there's like a lot more players that are giving you a holy cow level of play. So I think that the most exciting thing probably is just the element of parity.
Talking with lacrosse offensive innovative guru Jamie Munro, and Jamie is head of JM3 Sports and former Brown All-American, Denver coach, Yale assistant, and kind of a guy everybody looks to kind of give us the next thought with where we're headed offensively. Jamie, you've had an interesting career and always kind of staying ahead of the pack. Is that by design? And I asked this question because you started out as a soccer player back in Providence. And
Yep.
so did soccer give you that idea towards it when you finally got it back and around to lacrosse?
Sorry, you broke up a little bit. Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, I was saying that I was wondering if your soccer background gave you that impetus to sort of be that innovative lacrosse guy when you eventually got to high school and then into college.
Yeah, I mean, I think soccer was just my passion. I just loved to play. And back then, I didn't play club soccer. I played mostly pickup soccer. I did go to a few soccer camps here or there, but it was pretty much a self-learning thing. I just messed around and played all the time. And I was learning without knowing I was learning. I was thinking about things and trying things, but it was different then. And I would say that soccer background has brought me full circle back to it now as I went through, playing at Brown. At that time, there was less structure in the way that you were coached. My good friend, Bernie Bonanno, we played high school and college lacrosse together at Moses Brown and then at Brown. And we had our own little plays that we did. we would talk about these, it could just be a give and go when I was a freshman and he was a sophomore. And I was like, hey, I'm going to throw it down to you and I'm going to pretend like I'm going into the crease and then I'm going to cut, look for me. And that type of communication between players is something that became lost on kids because basically structure took over. And so now kids were doing what they were told to do. They were learning a lot of things. So I'm not saying structure is all bad, but it does rob players of them figuring stuff out for themselves. And I became a culprit of this in many ways as a coach because I was so into learning and seeing what players were doing that I would want to teach it. And sure enough, I was successful in teaching it. However, I don't think that I was successful in teaching if you looked at it in practice, but it wasn't necessarily successful in teaching it in the sense that they didn't really do it on their own to the degree that I felt they should. So it's like, all right, if you can feed behind the back or you could use all these deceptive fakes and moves and postures, but then you don't really remember to use them, what good is it having a toolkit that you don't really use? And so in the last several years, as I was able to step back from high school coaching and step back from being, the CEO of 3D Lacrosse, I started looking at the world through a completely different lens, and it became I've just dialed up and up and up the free play, the less structured environment, let the players figure things out. And then if you want to teach, go back and watch it later on film. And so back to the soccer, it really was how I learned to be an athlete. And I think it was the most valuable thing of my athletic career. And I'm kind of gone full circle with it.
Well, your coaches at Brown, they allow for innovation, they allow for a little sort of extracurricular to be able to have that kind of atmosphere as far as the landscape at Brown was concerned?
Yeah. At that time, there was more of that anyway. Okay. So, I mean, yeah, you might get yelled at if you took a bad shot because there was horns on the end line. So I don't know if you remember that, but when there was a horn on the end line, you took a bad shot, and then all of a sudden they're subbing all their poles in. There's 5 poles, So there was some stuff like that maybe got in the way of some creativity, but for the most part, they would just let us play, and we figured out how to play the game ourselves, and that was how it was. And Dom Starja was my coach, and he was a really skill development oriented guy. We did a lot of drills. I mean, I remember doing tight one-on-ones in like 1987, in the fall of 1987. I remember doing a one-on-one where we were being lined up right on the island with a defender. And I remember faking a behind the back shot. I never tried it before. I just faked a behind the back shot and stood there like I didn't have it. The kid turned around, then I scored, and everyone laughed. But that actually became a staple, and I did that later that year in a college game. Same play. I stood there, faked it, took what I call the drunk step. That's like your little stumble step, like you don't have the ball anymore. Sure enough, the defender turns around. So there really was an element at that time in the late 80s where coaches weren't controlling everything you did yet. It was the beginning of that coaching revolution, kind of.
Where did you get the idea that you wanted to end up coaching? Was that a bug set in college? Because you ended up as an assistant at, I believe, Yale for what, 9 years?
8 years there, yeah. I didn't think about it. All I know is that I didn't want to miss practice when I was a senior. And Dom was like, Jamie, why aren't you at the whatever job fair that all the seniors were at? I was like, well, because I want to go to practice. And so I just decided to go to Australia after graduation. I kind of traveled the world and ended up coaching. My first coaching gig was actually at Colorado College in 1990. So I didn't really know that I wanted to be a coach. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do, and that worked out. And then I really liked it.
What did you learn at Yale? I mean, what is it that got you going at Yale for those years? And who was the head coach at Yale when you were there?
Yeah, so it was a guy named Mike Waldvogel. I was really fortunate to get that job. Mike Waldvogel at the time was really looked at as like a defensive genius. And Yale had just come off a Final Four in 1990. They'd won 3 straight Ivy championships and then gone to the NCAA tournament 3 years in a row in 88, 89, 90. And then in 91 was my first season there. 92, we went to the NCAA tournament again and won a tournament game at Navy. And what I learned from Mike Waldvogel was really how to create an environment in practice that did the teaching and did the coaching on both sides of the ball. And I learned the value of applying pressure, particularly in practice, to develop your team, both your defense and your offense. We did not play a pressure style of defense at Yale. We played a sloughing man-to-man defense, very similar to the way you would sort of look at like the way a Notre Dame would play under Jerry Byrne and how they'll do it with Coach Corrigan now. I think they slid coma more back then and crease when the ball's behind now. But the idea of helping, of playing your flat triangles, of reading, Bill Tierney revolutionized defense in many ways with the quick early slide and that still happens, but now it's more of a read. It's not just automatic. The ball moves so well that you can't just go and expect to play great D. And so what I learned from Mike Waldvogel was the value of pressure and how it it really teaches your defense how to play faster, how to rotate, how to learn how to jump. We would jump every single pick. 4-on-4 double team was like the main drill that we did that I just have taken with me forever. I would always say that if I was stuck on an island and on a desert island and I could only have one drill, it would be 4-on-4 double team, because it teaches both sides of the ball as well as anything. So yeah, that's, I learned a lot from him. But I would say that'll be the biggest picture thing.
You went there as a defensive coach or an offensive coach?
I was the offensive coordinator for 7 years. I ended up being the defensive coordinator my last year at Yale before I went to Denver. And then when I was at Denver, I coached the defense, for my first, 3 or 4 years. And then when I hired John Torpy, he ended up being the defensive coordinator. But, as much as I was an offensive player and it's fun to talk about all that stuff, defense is just as big of a passion. I'm fascinated by what you can do on that side of the ball and how it impacts your whole team.
You're an O coordinator going up against every day, basically a defensive genius. That's got to give you some lessons as well, I would think.
Yeah, I learned very well how to mirror the head coach as the assistant. So when you think about an attackman mirroring, the guy behind the net and backing up the net, I would mirror Coach Waldvogel, because he would just rip me if our offense was screwing. I'd be like, Jamie, what the hell are they doing out there? And so when I was a young coach, I was the only assistant. I would just mirror him on the other side of the field. And it was classic. It was old school, man, but it was kind of, it was a rite of passage.
So your first head job is at Denver, which is at that point not exactly the hotbed of lacrosse. It's out west. And Great Western, I think, was the league at the time.
Yep.
Were you kind of the first guy to bring Canadians over? Kind of recognize that the box game was important? Because that's been
I wouldn't say it. I wasn't the first for sure, but I definitely was one of those guys that propagated it, and I probably really studied it and tried to translate my coaching into more of a box style, because I just recognized the value. I'd played 1 year in the MILL back in the day, and I was blown away by what it did for my game. And then I realized from a recruiting perspective, I could go get players that were higher level players than I could get at Denver. I could get them from Canada more easily than I could from Long Island or Maryland. So I kind of figured out where my sweet spot in recruiting was, which was sort of Midwest, recruited a ton of Ohio and Michigan kids. And then West, Colorado, California, and then Canadians. And, more so Western Canadians. We did get some really good Eastern Canadians like Cam Flint and Mark Matthews, Jamie Lincoln. But for the most part, we got a lot of British Columbia kids, a lot of Burnaby kids. And so it was a game changer, for me and for our program. And it helped us be able to, go from not very good to pretty good and pretty good to good and good to really good. And I never got the chance to go from good to really good to great, but we were on that trajectory.
2006, 2008, I think you had NCAA appearances, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we did. And what was cool about it too was, we would have made the tournament. In 2008, we made it as an at-large. There were 3 teams from the GWLL that made it that year. So it was Ohio State was great that year in 2008. That was Bresci's year that they beat Cornell in the tournament, and that was really what propelled them down to Carolina. Notre Dame was really good in 2008 too, and we were really good. And so to make it as an at-large was something that was, you'd rather win the league, of course, but to be good enough to get in as an at-large was like a really big deal. We were like 12th in the RPI or something like that, and so we were kind of on our way to being pretty competitive on a national basis.
I think the Great Western postseason tournament was played in Birmingham, Michigan.
It was
for several years, which is the first time we kind of saw what you did, and it was fairly amazing because I'm a Canadian box guy. When I went to California, somebody asked me to coach lacrosse, and I asked where the rink was because what did I know from field lacrosse? You can catch and pass, but then all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we play on the field. So the first couple of years, trying to figure out, well, it was back in the late '80s from going from one game to another. It was a bit of a difference because it wasn't played the same, but it was was an advantage because our kids early when we started coaching in programs that didn't have any background, we concentrated on being able to catch and pass the ball.
Yeah.
It should be a little bit like if you can't ice skate, you can't hard time playing hockey.
Right.
And I think sometimes we forget that. But the innovative ideas that you brought to Denver was a game changer in a lot of ways. So I think you've been gifted enough to look ahead. And I don't know if that's by luck or by happenstance, because the thing I want to talk about a lot is the body of work that you've developed and all of the with JM3 and all of the videos and the coaching clinics and all the things that you do. Would you be a teacher if you weren't doing what you do now?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I do love teaching and I love learning, and I think that I don't really think that anything that I've done, I've actually thought of. I've just heard about it, noticed it, and probably taken it to a little bit of a different level or a different direction and put my own spin on it. And that's kind of how it goes. I mean, like if you're really paying attention and really searching and looking all the time, you'll find stuff. And then the way you put it together will be original, but it wasn't like, all of the stuff that I probably saw somebody else do, heard somebody else talk about, and then really started sort of pondering it myself. So I would say, yeah, I probably could be pretty happy being a teacher. But also I'm a student.
What have you learned from all of this media gathering and all this information gathering? What is it that's taught you that is sort of a mission for you right now?
Well, when I sold 3D, I knew that I wanted to get into something digital, and I always have had interest in coaches training. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw those videos, the USA lacrosse progression videos back in the day. That was my first foray into diving into the game and really studying it.
Right.
And I learned so much from that. That was like a 3-year project. It was a massive undertaking, actually, of time. And we created these video series on at the time, it was everything that I had thought of or that I was thinking of. And I was kind of in this major learning mode anyways, because I was like 20, 24, 25, 26, 27, something like that. And then when I sort of revisited this starting in around 2017-ish, about 3 years ago, right around now, I was like, well, I really want to create an awesome coaches education platform. I think I can do it. I might be as qualified as anybody in the world that isn't coaching. So because I wasn't hiding anything, like if I was the head coach at Denver or something, I'm not going to tell you everything we do. You might figure it out and I'll share things, but also I just sort of have this sort of combination of access, of knowledge, of passion and time. So I just went on this journey, but simultaneously I was starting to go on this journey of free play. And so whereas what I would have believed was you can teach every variation of every skill through really intelligent, well thought out build-ups and progressions of introduction and all right, do it on, introduce it, do it on air, do it in a 2-on-1, layer new things on into 3-on-2s, and you can do it all even. And then, presto, everybody can do everything and you're good to go. Which again, I alluded to this earlier. It was true. We did teach every variation of every skill and they could do everything and the practices were impressive. But why wasn't it better transferable, to games? Why wasn't it? And I don't want to suggest that these, the high school teams we coached, the things we didn't work at all. It just wasn't a good enough percentage of transfer in my eyes. So I just started really going down this path of free play, and concurrently, film was probably the biggest thing that helped me learn. I just watched so much film. I started filming practice and, in February 2000, right before, the week or two before we were playing Villanova, I needed to learn how to run a zone defense. I'd never done it before. So I just started filming practice and I was like, this is incredible. So you add that up, you add this free play model, and then you start looking at film. And I'd say that the biggest thing that I've sort of come to now is just this combination of coaching coaches on how to create the environments to do the teaching, and then go back and watch it on film and see what happened. And instead of trying to tell people to do a skill, let them figure it out on their own, and then go back and watch it and say, well, what happened there? Why did that work? Why did that ball get picked off? Why did you beat that player? Why did the goalie make that save? Why did the defense break down? Like, what happened? And if you do that with players and they understand, then they can go play. They don't think, just play implicitly, then go back and watch it. And I just kind of learned that this model of using digital for examples, watching what you've done, but then let them play, I think is the best model, at least now. That's what I think.
Football coaches for years have used film extensively, probably more than most other sports. Was that a catalyst in that process?
No, I don't think so. I mean, certainly, when I was a young head coach, I wanted to think of myself as like putting in NFL coach type hours. I just wanted to like outwork everybody. And film, my first real foray into film was that USA Lacrosse progression stuff, where I started watching so much and I learned a lot. And we would watch it at Yale and stuff. But like I said, I needed to install a zone. I had no idea if we were doing it well and doing it right. And I was trying to figure out drills that would teach it. And I was on the phone with everybody. I remember Bill Durgel was so good to me, and JB Clark, great, sending me videos, teaching me this zone, and Tony Seaman. I probably talked to, listen, I've called everybody on the planet to learn something from. But I didn't know if I was doing it right. So we filmed it. And that was really where we started filming. And then we would film everything starting then. So there was a lot, we probably filmed every practice before most college programs were, honestly, but it was certainly not compared to football.
A lot of the information you've gathered also doesn't necessarily come from the top 7 coaches in the country. It comes from as vast of a landscape as possible, I would think. A lot of the stuff you've got is from high school coaches. I mean, so it comes from all sort of walks of life, right? Totally.
You can learn from every scenario you're in, every conversation you have. It's oftentimes, it's like the quote, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. And I'm not implying that I know it all, but I might be really well versed in a topic. And so one little thing is going to like resonate with me more than if I, was just learning the topic. So every time I look back, I'm like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, 5 years ago. And then, and I'm sure in 5 years from now, I'll say the same thing. So, but yeah, I learned from coaching. I learned from watching what kids do. I learned from the mistakes that end up being a mistake because it wasn't what you were asking them to do, but it was better. And that's kind of where I am now is honestly let the players figure it out and then go back and see what happened. It's kind of like this idea, a game is like the wilderness. It's like a jungle. Can't control it. And if you're comfortable in that wilderness and in that jungle as a player, you can do really well. But if you train in a zoo all the time, you're really not going to be very comfortable when you get set out and released into the wild. So the idea is try to make it out of control and let them control it as much as possible. And then I think they'll have the poise to be able to play.
Okay. 2-part question. Do we use film? Do most high school coaches and college coaches, obviously, do most youth and high school and travel coaches use film enough? And then if they use it, or if they're not familiar with it, any suggestions on how they might use it to a better efficiency?
Yeah. So I would say, people probably don't use it as much as they could. It's hard to say what's enough. I coach high school girls and I film every practice. I'm fascinated with what's happening. And so, obviously everybody looks at game film. And as far as club goes, it's hard because you just don't have the time probably when you have I don't know how many travel teams you have, but I don't know who's going to be watching all that film, and your contract coaches they're getting paid maybe a couple $1,000 for the summer. They're not going to probably spend a ton of time. Dad coaches, much more likely to do that. People always like to rip on dad coaches and daddy ball, but the truth is a dad coach will probably pay for the film and watch it. So I think generally people don't use film as much as they could or should. And if you don't look at the film, you don't actually know what happened. What you think happened and what happened are two different things. You need to go back and watch it, and you need to be able to pause and rewind it. And it makes a massive difference to learn what actually happened and to see yourself. As far as how do you use it, kind of the way I describe the way I use it with all the athletes I work with. What happened on that? Why did that work? Why did you do that? That was awesome. That fake was sick. What made you think of that? Sometimes it was, I don't know, I just did it. And sometimes it was like, well, because I saw this, and it's all good. It's all fascinating. And I think if you just look at what happened and try to figure out why something worked or didn't work on either side of the ball you want to look at, that is where the gems can be found.
I think programs like Huddle have given the amateur coaches a step up. We use it exclusively. Huddle Assist. I can take information, send it to a kid on something specifically that he did. They also do stats so that they're more professionally done versus we actually had a team last year submit for an All-American status for an intercollegiate club program that they had 100% save average for a goaltender. They had to kind of explain to them that you have to count the misses. But the tool, Dartfish a number of years ago came out with a program where you could see the skier come down the hill. I'm involved in the ski racing world, and you could see the skier come down the hill, and you could overlay your players over the top of it. And somebody would say, well, why are you going slower? Well, here's the inside track for one skier, and you're outside the track, and it's about speed. And I think sometimes the platforms are available, but we don't use enough of them. I don't think we use them as efficiently as we could. And it's easier to show a kid in 30 seconds with my phone on a video why his hips aren't coming through when he's shooting than to explain to him for 50 minutes, and he's not going to understand it anyway. And I think that's the innovation you've brought to the table, I think, is something that's fairly important because I think as I watch kids in our area and coaches in our area, I think they're reaching out more and more to see. Now, my quick question is, you sometimes will do sort of free seminars from time to time during the year. Are those numbers going up when you give those out? I'm assuming they are because the valuable information.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny because when I first got started with all this stuff, it wasn't, we weren't in this crazy COVID time where everything is Zoom and everything is remote. Certainly there's a lot more competition and more eyeballs now. And being a little bit ahead of the time on video analysis, and people didn't really recognize that as a product, they didn't even really know they needed it. Even though every college coach will tell you film is the biggest developer of their players, and their players come in individually, and that's what you get when you go to college. You go in the office and you watch with your coach, your coordinator, maybe another player or two, and you're going over what happened in practice and what's going on in games and how you can get better, and it gives you a true understanding. So I think yeah, it's awesome.
Do we do enough fun play, sandlot? I'll use sandlot baseball as the example. You've been pretty famous with throwing out a net in front yard, a small little kid's net, and go play tennis ball. 3-on-3, 2-on-2, whatever it might be. Are we doing enough of those things? Everything seems to be organized for kids now, and we don't seem to get to the kids just playing among themselves.
Yeah. So, earlier you referenced the concept of robbing kids. And I think we are robbing kids of their development by making everything structured. Like, I don't look at, I don't look at it as robbing kids from a perspective of a bad product, because that's just, a bad product. It's supply and demand. Eventually the better products are going to win out, and the lesser products are either going to get better or they're going to go out of business. But I look at robbing kids of an opportunity to just play. We're not doing it on purpose. Everything we're doing is in the spirit of doing it better. So it's not even like, I don't look at all of this as everybody's, trying to rob kids, but we are robbing them because you learn so much more when you learn implicitly, when you're just playing, than you do when you're being taught stuff. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to wrap their head around, but it is true. And I'm finding it, and I've literally just dialed it up and up and up. And the more I dial it up, the more results I see from the athletes I work with across the country when they start playing these games. And when you talk about these little nets and these little kid nets, what they are is they're like box nets. It is box is what it is. When you play with a 3x3 net, or my preferred size is a 3.6 by 3.6, it gives you a box environment. And what does that mean? What is a box environment? Well, you can't score if you don't get to the middle. That's probably the number one environment in box lacrosse. Whereas in field lacrosse, you can shoot, crappy alley shots and they'll go in, particularly at the younger ages. And you can't just clear space and dodge with all your speed. You got to slow down. You have to be able to shoot the ball when you can't even see the net and know that the angle is there. With the proverbial eyes on the stick can see net that the eyes in your head cannot see. And the two-man game is a product of it's easier to create space by bringing people together in that game. You can't just clear everybody out and box across and dodge an alley. You got to get to the middle, and it makes it more easy. It makes it easier to bring players together to create that space. And then you learn it's actually easier to get to the middle without the ball than it is with the ball. And so all of these things end up happening in these small games, and the players figure it out. I would say the end result of what I've always believed is the same now as what it's always been. It's just more of like, how do you get there? And getting there through free play is, in my opinion, a faster, much faster way of getting there, in a more effective way. And as coaches, we should get out of the way and stop telling people how to do a technique, but let them figure out, because they will. And because the techniques that we're teaching oftentimes are what I would call fake fundamentals, because they're not actually always true. So if we tell someone you got to shoot overhand all the time, I mean, that's fine. Overhand, it's an important skill. But you're going to shoot it right into the goalie at times. You got to be able to throw it around the goalie or around a person, around a screen. You got to change your swing angles for lots of different reasons. So I think the free play model is something that the classic thing is, it is free. You can do it. And I could do lessons. I've got a daughter who's a senior in high school. I could do lessons with her every day if I wanted to. I never do. We do not do lessons. We play. We play pickup in front of the house. We get kids together, boys and girls. Remarkable. People wouldn't believe that boys and girls could play pickup and it could be good for the boys, but it's phenomenal for the boys. And it's incredible if you watch these girls play and these boys play and how much better they get.
Well, there's some stories that you actually used to pay high school kids $20 to come over to make sure they could play.
When we first got it started, I just wanted to guarantee a game. And so people are not used to it. Most kids would rather say, I don't want to play 3x, I want to just go shoot. They think they're accomplishing more if they go shoot a bucket of balls, which I would disagree with. It's not to say shooting a bucket of balls is a waste of time, but it is an opportunity cost if you could have been playing against other human beings and figuring out how to score on a person and against people. And so, yeah, I would, when we first got our games going, I would hire a couple high school kids, pay them $20. My wife was like, Jamie, you're such a loser to have to pay people to play 3x with you. And I was like, I don't care. I want a guarantee. And we got it going. Now, today, I don't send out any texts. My daughter sends it out, and boys and girls show up, and we play 5x. We used to play games. We'd have 2 or 3, 6 people. Now we got 10, 12 kids, and it's awesome.
One of the tenets of those games, and I think that's something we learned early on, was that no rocket shots from the top of the box. Everything's got to be passing and catching. And I think once you understand that, we've added it to our high school program to start practice. We do 15 minutes of warm up with that, and it's made not so much at the higher level. And even with my college club team, we do the same thing with those guys. And they thought I was nuts at first, and now it's the staple of in the middle of practice. It's sort of the break. And so we're taking that 15-minute water break as we're going over some specific things. And if I miss it on a particular day, I get called out because it's the fun time where, little Bobby got screwed yesterday by one of the guys that wants to make sure he gets back today. And then this year we've added it one more step. We've actually taken the points. So at the end of it, it's 2-on-2. There's 2 steak dinners across the street from the university at a pretty nice restaurant. So like $100 gift certificate to go eat. So now it's become very competitive. And all we do is sit back and watch. And the long sticks have to go to short sticks. And that's the huge part of that same discussion. So, we've got a big band of things, and they're terrible sticks, but it's something you collect over the years. But I watched the guys get better faster. And I think that's the jewel to that whole thing. And again, it doesn't cost anything.
One of the things, the reason why I went to a little bit of a bigger net, a 4x4 is too big.
Right.
So it's just too easy to score. A 3x3 is, in my opinion, not for every game, but for a lot of the games, it is so small that there's not much to shoot at, and it actually means you have to shoot it harder and usually low. You just got to kind of zip. If you try to play a 3-on-3 plus a goalie or a 4-on-3 type of game or something like that, I actually encourage the outside shots. I just want them shot with touch. So the high heat piece is real. Like, you can't afford to be blasting shots high because you're going to hurt somebody. But to be able to shoot with deception from the outside, and to be able to shoot with touch and around screens, and shoot curveballs and all these different shots are actually a huge part of the value. And then the other thing I wanted to mention that most people don't get is the no equipment versus full equipment. And so they'll think, well, how could no equipment give you a similar look to full equipment? And the answer is that so much of it is exactly the same. If you go out and play at a 3-on-2 West Jenny drill, you're not going to take much of a hit. I mean, you might take a poke, you might take a slap, but it's not particularly physical. And if you're playing these games, it's exactly the same. All of the passing, the faking, the finishing, the one-mores. And then when you think about the actual physicality of these no equipment games, you will play sort of cross-check defense. You're not crushing the guy, but you're holding them. And you get this feel for how to slow down and stick your body into a cross-check and look and see and feed. And while you're playing all these two-man games, you're getting the exact same reads and looks and seeing of the field and the swings. And so in the end, what happens with no equipment is you get 99% of what you would get in full equipment, but you get about 10 times more, because I can play a 5-on-5 game for 75 minutes straight with a quick drink in between games. Whereas if you're playing 5-on-5 with a practice, you can play for about a minute or two before you're exhausted. And so it scales the heck out of your reps.
It's also, at your age, the opportunity to still school some younger guys. There's a certain fun advantage to that with your kids around, being able to play and be the kid in the group, so to speak.
Oh, it's so fun. I mean, the funny thing is I keep learning myself. So, I'm 53 years old, and I was out there this week. I played a lot this week, and I'm really into baiting right now. Baiting is very interesting. It's very under discussed. And again, I didn't make this up, but I am sort of like pioneering it into another level of, I watch Chase Scanlon, or I watch, Zach Miller come to mind. There's a couple native guys that just, I seem to hope you do too. They just kind of hold their stick right in front of you and see if you'll swing at it. And guess what? A lot of people will.
Explain the difference between probing and baiting, because I think somebody may not know that may be watching this. There's a big difference between those two arts. Yeah.
Well, probing is I did a podcast on that recently, and it's really, probing is when you're sort of you're trying to see how the defense is playing you. You slow down. It's kind of an in and out, stick your body in, fake, look, slow down, see what they're doing, and you're kind of feeling out the defense. And a lot of college coaches will talk about probing in early offense. For example, like, hey, stick your body in there and see what happens. Probe a little bit. Probing happens, Pat Spencer is like the ultimate guy who probed a defense, because if you went too hard, he would draw a slide. So he was using physicality and fakes and changes, bounces to try to get himself close enough to feed or score. Baiting is a very general term. I mean, it can apply to a lot of things, but essentially baiting is trying to entice somebody into doing something. And so baiting could be, I remember learning baiting when I was a little kid playing lacrosse, and I would hold my stick and sort of show it behind me and see if I could get someone to go over my head, right? I mean, that's baiting. Baiting, you might bait a slide. When you're probing, you will oftentimes be baiting a defense in one way or another. You might bait, like I was referencing before. I mean, if you kind of hold your stick in a way that you just say a shorty's on you, and you kind of bring your stick in front of your face a little bit, and you bait them to swing at it. If they miss, you're gone. There's really a lot of different ways to kind of bait people. Goalies bait shooters, right? Defenders you might bait somebody to make a pass. When you're slow playing a 2-on-1, you're baiting them into making the pass to the guy you're already guarding. So baiting is a level of deception. And when I was referencing it, I was really kind of talking about trying to bait people into swinging at your stick. And it's a great way to kind of get out of double teams. I mean, you can, it's an amazing way to split doubles. And it's just interesting.
Just, I guess, one last question, a couple last questions. And I spent 9 years coaching a college, Michigan State's women's lacrosse team. I had no background in women's lacrosse, never saw a game, and went about it like I was coaching a men's team. So biggest complaint was that there was not enough girls on the field. And when you coach a men's team, you make sure everybody gets in. So instead of playing 12, 13, 14 girls, we ended up playing 22, 23 the first year. And lo and behold, everybody was happy because everybody got in the game. There's a lot of guys coming into the men's game, to the women's game. And I think the women's game is changing because of it, and for the good. And I think there's a lot of things I've learned from the girls' side that I brought back to the men's side. And I think so maybe you can talk about a little bit of the crossover that maybe they could share with each other, and they could do a better job at that.
Yeah. Well, obviously, like you, I grew up with men's lacrosse, but I'm a girl dad. So I started getting into coaching my daughters. And with this whole free play thing, like I said before, it's really it's boys and girls. I've got endless amount of video of Division I boys and girls, college committed boys and girls, early high school boys and girls, middle school boys and girls, all playing. The games are very, very similar. There are people that will say, well, the game is so different. It's not. Anyone who says that doesn't know either game that well, because if you knew the game, you'd know that there are some rule differences, but for the most part, the fundamentals of everything are the same. All of the footwork is the same. The stick work is the same. The off-ball reads and movement, the two-man game. Women's lacrosse is probably closer to men's lacrosse than girls lacrosse is to women's lacrosse, which is something that, people should know,
right? Especially
if they're wondering, why men can come over to the women's game, because the way that women's lacrosse is played, it's very physical. You can cross check when someone's dodging you. You do play these pressure defenses, and you do have zones and mans and all of that. And with more people on the field, it's more complicated, frankly. You got 7-on-7 instead of 6-on-6.
I had more girls bruised than any guy I ever saw play on the arms. Yeah. I would watch them. And in fact, we're teaching young men coming out, especially at the elementary school level. We have a slew of women's sticks. We're teaching them right off the bat to use women's sticks instead of using men's stick. And the development is so much faster because they've got to have better hands. It's not that hard to fit.
I might argue that point.
Okay.
Because I don't think anybody should start playing with women's sticks. I don't think girls should start playing. I think you're better off playing with a men's stick. And then eventually, I think it's good for any man to play with a woman's stick and see what it's like. But catching is the hardest thing. And yes, it teaches you to have soft hands, but you want to make that easier rather than harder. And there's not all women's sticks are created equal either, right? So if you get some, off the shelf women's stick, it's purely a tennis racket. You're not going to have much success with catching. But let's go deeper. One of the things that throwing with a women's stick is much harder because you can't really swing. Your swing is going to be shorter.
Right. And
that gets in the way of players' abilities to swing at different angles, such as underhand and sidearm and around people. And it gets in the way of those same angles with feeding. And it gets in the way of your abilities to really get your body into a swing at all. It's very, very hard to do. And I encourage every single girl that I work with and that play in our pickup games, they all use boys sticks. None of them, I shouldn't say none of them, most of them do not use women's sticks. And we also use a tennis ball in these games. And so you have a girl stick and a tennis ball, and now it's that much worse. You won't learn how to fake and feed and shoot with the same repertoire as you could learn, but it would take you a lot longer. The environment in box lacrosse, for example, is what does the teaching, right?
Right.
Well, so does the environment of your stick in your pocket. So if you have an environment where that thing's rolling out, unless you keep it vertical and you're not going to be able to reach, then you're not going to. And there are some positives to that. The environment that you reference of, hey, you got to have great hands to catch is real. But I would look at that as something that I would rather do once somebody has got a proficiency rather than trying to learn that way. I'd rather make the learning easier and more fun. Granted, on the flip side, you get these boys with these huge whips in their stick and they can't throw at all. That's a terrible environment to learn the game too, because they never learn to move the ball. But again, they would learn to move the ball if they just played in these small-sided environments. Well, they would actually figure it out.
And please understand, we're not talking about having a woman's stick in their hands for weeks. We're talking about a few hours just to get the idea of understanding so you can learn to catch behind your ear. That's kind of one of those processes that we've worked with. So
yeah, I hear you. I would just say that I think you're probably better off learning the game with a boy's stick without a huge whip.
All right. We'll certainly take a look at that. So I appreciate the advice. I guess I want to wrap this up by saying, first of all, thank you. You talk about sort of a guy who wants to make a better wheel, but I'm a believer that the guy that was there first deserves the credit. And there's a lot of things you did that were a lot more than just inventing a better wheel. You were first in a lot of ways. And I think that's something that maybe you don't recognize from at least the outside world, because I think that's the way we look at you. And so for all that, I want to, as a coach, I've learned a lot from you. And I think a lot of folks have. And I think that's something that maybe could be better handled and better credited, if that makes any sense.
Well, I appreciate it, man. I really do. We all get to share in this incredible game, the creator's game. And, I get along really well with people that like talking lacrosse. So you and I get along quite well. I enjoyed this conversation.
Jamie, thank you for your time, and we will certainly be in touch, and have a great winter and be safe if nothing else.